Everybody, and welcome to our Fireside Chats. Today I'm delighted to welcome Holly Ransom to the couch. Holly's secret weapon is simplifying the complex to make the difficult doable. Founder and CEO of Emergent, Holly helps leaders and teams formulate the questions to find their disruption strategy, never more relevant than now. She is driven by the belief that we can't change what we can't challenge, and we can't challenge what we don't understand. By fighting complexity with curiosity, apathy and empowerment, and fear with fact, Holly helps people ask better questions, identify better answers, and build a better tomorrow, which we really need, Holly. Welcome to the couch.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be
pleasure.
Here. It's nice to be in person with someone, isn't it? At the moment, we were saying this morning. You still naturally want to go to hug each other and shake hands, and we're just having to continually remind ourselves of this new world order we're adapting to.
I get so excited on Tuesdays and Thursdays when I'm coming in. It's great. So let's sort of kick off with a little bit about you in terms of when you were little and what you wanted to do and be when you grew up. Just talk us through that.
Oh gosh, it was ever evolving. I think the earliest one I can remember is going to my mum when I was very, very little. I came running home from school. I remember saying, Mum, I know what I want to be. And I'd obviously seen something that day at primary school, so it was a ballerina that morning. And I saw my mum do that intake of breath when you can see someone's working really hard to process how they let their child down gently, because I have two left feet. There was no way that was a fair aspiration for me in life. And I remember she decided that her strategy was going to be to talk up the level of effort involved. So she's like, oh, you're going to have to practice every day before school and after school. And my brain took about 5 seconds to think about that really hard. And I went, maybe I'll just be a firefighter then. So I think it was firefighter, there was a marine biologist in there for a while. There was definitely, I think at age 8, if you read my little year 3 journal, it was wanting to be the Brownlow medalist. So we had everything thrown in during my childhood. And then sort of later in life, it became this fascination with how we create better outcomes and how we create a better world. And I think it's morphed in terms of the sectors that I play in, but that's been the trajectory for a very long time now.
Yeah. I mean, you've had an incredible career so far.
Thank you.
And I think that, there's probably been more than one pivotal moment for you during your journey. Maybe just talk us through what some of your pivotal moments have been.
So a really interesting one. I think what I'm finding fascinating about this whole COVID experience too is how many people are taking the time to reflect and think about key things that drive them and motivate them, and what they might want to do or change moving beyond this moment as well. I think for me, probably some of the most pivotal moments have been interactions with key mentors and people who've shaped and given me advice in different ways. And I think back, probably some of one of the earliest pieces of advice I got, I was probably 18, an early mentor who really encouraged me that it's more important the people that you're working with and for than the work that it is that you're doing. So be really intentional around the people that you surround yourself with. And I think that's a through line of my career, whether it's building a team myself or whether it's choosing to work with and support certain leaders. I've always had a very strong bias to the value set and the vision of the people that I'm working with and alongside. I think some of the pivotal moments too have been getting close to the coalface of change itself, whether that was the opportunity I had to go build a micro enterprise in Kenya in the slums there, working with an extraordinary group of women who were living on less than, at the time, 75 Australian cents a day, and we're trying to feed anywhere from 3 to 11 kids on that.
Yeah, right.
I mean, just the perspective that gives you. I was so lucky and blessed to be born in this country and to have the privilege and the opportunity that I've had. And I think one of the things I try and do consistently, particularly given the heartbeat I've got for wanting to create better social outcomes, is try and find opportunities to continually get close to the issue, the people. One of my mentors always describes it as meet the people, feel the issues. So how regularly can you do that?
Yeah, nice.
And that for me has been really important as well.
Yeah, nice. And so you're studying at the moment as well?
I am. I'm now studying online. Yes, that was not the original intention.
So you're studying online, and you're studying online from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. as we discussed this morning.
Yes, that was
out
last
of
night.
the US.
Yes.
So just talk us through what an average day is looking like for you at the moment.
So it's a little bit all over the place, as you mentioned. So I'm technically meant to be in Cambridge and Boston right now.
Yeah.
Harvard closed its campus, it must be 6 weeks ago now. It was really interesting, actually, as a microcosm for what's happened in the world, watching that happen. I think it was the Friday afternoon, we were on campus. Harvard had just made the decision that they were going to shut down conferences and stop people coming into campus. And by Tuesday morning, they'd made the decision that we weren't coming back after spring break, and they closed the whole campus down. So it was this really rapid escalation in circumstances. And I thought the US would follow a similar trajectory. As we've seen, the administration didn't move that quickly, but certainly it looked like they might. And so I took that opportunity to get back to Australia before borders closed, which has meant doing online learning. So nights, particularly at the moment, when we're in assessment periods, we'll often start about 10 p.m, run through to about 3 a.m. I'll often go to bed then and skip the afternoon session and then get up and start working again. So I'm sort of working the night shift, I would say, at the moment. And then trying to do part of the catch-up work in the actual assignments and busy work side of things, and continuing some of my business work that can still function in COVID in the mornings during the Australian daytime. So it's a bit all over the place.
Okay. And so I suppose sort of following on from that, is there any tips in anything that you're doing in terms of how you're managing at the moment?
It's a great question, and I'd love to hear online, for those that are watching and jumping on social, what you're doing to adapt. I think probably my biggest observation of something I didn't do well enough in the first 2 weeks was be really conscious about micro breaks. So I think one of the things we know about our attention spans and our energy levels is there is a kind of circadian rhythm to our body. Some of us are better in mornings and evenings. It's important to know about ourselves. But the other thing is our attention span doesn't tend to work much more than 90 minutes in any one go. So I think one of the things that I had missed is just getting up for 15 minutes. Go make yourself a cup of tea, go call someone to catch up and connect so you've got some kind of interaction, go for a walk around the block, whatever it is that breaks that up. Because I don't know if you're all feeling this, but sitting on Zoom call after Zoom call, or watching lecture after lecture, or listening in, or like whatever you're doing on email or building documents, it's unbelievably taxing. And I think one of the misconceptions about working from home and working during COVID is somehow that we're not working as hard. Productivity might be taking a different form to the level of focus on one single thing we can do in the office, but we are stretched and our bandwidth is being pulled in more directions than arguably it has been in recent times. And I think there's a general level of burnout that people are starting to feel and experience. So that importance of making intentional and almost starting your day, now I'm doing it from the point of view of scheduling, where I'll sit down every morning and I will actually schedule my whole day out, even though I don't have to be in places the way that I used to when things were running as normal. And I'll be really mindful around what's recharging me and how am I putting that in my day as a commitment to myself, because I know I'm not going to be able to get through what I need to if that's not front and center of how I'm designing a day.
Okay, awesome. I think that from a Zoom perspective, I totally agree with you, right? Because it's a completely different level of concentration as well. And like when you're sitting in a work meeting face to face, it's just completely different in terms of how you interact, how people are interacting back with you.
And you don't get the same bounce of the energy effect back, do you?
You don't.
Like that's one of the things I'm noticing is it's great to connect, and seeing facial expressions and body language is so much better than when you're just on the end of a phone call. But you don't get it like I'm experiencing now with you. And that, I think, is something we're all struggling to adjust to.
It's that whole human contact, isn't it?
Big time. Absolutely.
So let's jump into a couple of sort of meaty questions now.
What do you got?
Okay, so how do you think business leaders can stay ahead of the new world policy changes and the implications resulting now from COVID-19?
It's a really, really challenging one. I think it's something everyone's trying to work their way through at the moment. And to be honest, I think what the critical thing is, to the degree that you're capable, and I appreciate that everyone's at a really different point in this journey, and there's some very acute pain and stress and pressure that everyone's feeling right now. So this is not a broad sweeping statement, but there is a need to be thinking about how do we deal with the immediate fire, and how do we start thinking about where sort of the hockey puck's moving to, where's it going next? So I think to the degree that you can, whether it's working to kind of create, if you're running an organisation, whether you've got a team of your people that are starting to think about, or one of the things they're briefed with is, okay, what will this mean? What are we likely to be experiencing in 3 months, 6 months? Who are we looking at? What information sources are we going to get some sense of that? The thing is as well, this is unprecedented. So there isn't reference points that we have in the way that if we were dealing with, as devastating as it would be, a natural disaster or something, we have a sense of, okay, this is how this tends to impact an economy, a health system, infrastructure. We can make a plan for what this is going to look like out the other side. So part of it is going to have to be, okay, let's do some scenario planning. Let's get our team together, or let me devote, maybe it's a couple of hours a week, maybe it's a certain time of your day where you feel particularly creative or you need to shift your energy state, but be putting some thought into that medium-term scenario. I don't think we can go to long-term yet. There's too many things outside of our control, but we need to be making sure we're planning for more than just the day-to-day reality. So while that needs to be absolutely present focus, how are my people doing? How's everything running from an operational standpoint right now? You need to be putting that effort in. And the thing I'd encourage you to think about as well, this is something I discussed in a podcast with Emma Grigson, who's a former leader in the Australian Army last week. How do you stress test that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because one of the things is it's going to need to be dynamic, so you need to have some people who are jumping in and challenging you. So if you've got one team, or you've got, even if you do it by weeks, job this week is to come up with some scenarios, job next week is to try and break our scenarios.
Yep.
What are the problems? What haven't we thought about? What might change and completely pull the rug out from under us? The more that we've thought through that, the better prepared we're going to be when more disruption comes or that situation changes, to be in a position to control the way that we adapt.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people are really struggling with, I was reading this really interesting article the other day about leaders are sort of trying to pull together some sort of strategy to move forward post-COVID-19. Yeah. And they sort of come up with a plan, and then tomorrow everything's different. So people are really grappling with how to actually manage that. Mm-hmm. What would your advice be in that space? Just following on from what you just said.
Completely, and this isn't going to stop anytime soon. The degree of dynamism of this situation is extraordinary, and I'm finding it really interesting watching people who are almost so obsessed with trying to get some fact they can hang the plan on or the strategy on. So we're waiting for that. Okay, the government's going to reduce restrictions in 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. The borders are going to open again in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it might be. I think the challenge needs to be, we need to be less prescriptive on the time frame and more worried about the preconditions. Yep. So I would say there are 3 preconditions that we're looking for broadly within the world for things to start to return to normal. One would be that we need the infection rate to slow, which fortunately in Australia we're sitting in a pretty good place around. Mm-hmm. The second would be that we need to be in a place where we can adequately kind of test and contact trace. So we can actually start to ease restrictions because we're confident in our ability to identify and deal with the situation, because we're not going to get COVID to zero until we have universal adoption of a vaccine. That's a long time off. So we're going to be easing restrictions at some point while there's still a fair bit of uncertainty and where there will still be fluctuations in the infection rate. And the third thing would be we need the health system to be at a point where it's not completely overwhelmed and we can protect our frontline health workers adequately. And again, we're probably better placed than some other countries to do that. So we need to be thinking about planning for certain points in preconditions or certain points that tell your industry or give you confidence in things that we can enact when the situation appears. Because we can't control the timelines, but we can control what the decisions on those timelines catalyse for us. Mm-hmm. So I'd say focus on what points you're looking to see, and again, there will need to be a variety of scenarios in that, and don't become so obsessed with the time frame that they're going to happen on, because that will continue to shift and change. Yep. Think about those key pillars that you want to build your response to, would be my advice.
Okay, great advice. I think, you've touched on a couple of times this morning, on leadership and the importance of really good leadership, particularly at a point in time like now. What are your thoughts on who's been leading really well? So, Jacinta Ardern always comes up to the top of the list in terms of her leadership. What have you observed? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think one of the reasons it's particularly interesting right now, and I was thinking about this, talking with classmates of mine from around the world about their reflections on their leaders' responses, is really for the first time in modern history, the universality of the threat means we can kind of benchmark and scorecard leaders in a way that we haven't really been able to before, because to a degree we're all as vulnerable. And so I think it's an interesting benchmarking exercise for different styles of leadership. I think Jacinta does come out on top of a lot of people's list for a variety of reasons. I think one is the decisiveness of the action, but I think secondly is this balance that she held well between that decisiveness and the empathy. Yep. And I think what's interesting is you're continually seeing people call out a lot of the world's female leaders. Angela Merkel has had a similar response, particularly to her original public address about this in Germany. I think across the board, you're seeing these points of light too. There are certain provinces in India that have done an unbelievably good job at a very grassroots level of keeping their people safe, irrespective of the country's bigger picture. I think certainly we continually see Taiwan coming out as a country people are calling out saying unbelievably well-managed low infection rate. You look at the story behind that, that's because Taiwan had a horrible experience with SARS. And they really delved into the post-mortem of what happened there and went, what do we need to do to improve the way that we respond to situations like this? And in credit to them, their response to this pandemic has been a totally different story to what it was in the early 2000s with SARS. So I think what's interesting broadly is we've seen for 2 decades now a decline in the general level of trust in leaders. In fact, to a pretty dismal level. Like Australia last year, if you're looking at the Edelman Trust Barometer, we've got less than 50% of people. So we are more untrusting than trusting across business, across government, across the media and civil society. And now all of a sudden we're thrown into a situation where we have to trust in the system and that people who are employed in key roles are going to do right by us. And what I've found quite encouraging and heartwarming, to be perfectly honest, to observe, is that 60% of us are happy with our government's response. And for the first time, there's this change in language, and see if you notice it in conversations that you're in this week, where we're using we to describe the government. Now, it's always, for a long time, been them. Or that mob in Canberra, or, you know, and all of a sudden... The pollies, exactly, and often with a perhaps even nastier tone than that to it. And now we're seeing this somewhat ownership of the collective decision-making. And I actually think that is a really nice point of light out of a situation of darkness. Because we do need strong public institutions and we do need confidence in our political systems and structures in order to be able to move through crisis, in order to be able to trust in people's ability to innovate and build a better tomorrow out of this. So I actually think it's encouraging that, and I think part of that is because we've seen more open doors in Canberra at a state level, you name it. They've listened to business, they've listened to unions, they've heard the call outs of different groups in our society and have done their best in quite rapid form to respond and adapt. And I don't think we've seen that level of iterative policy making and that level of listening for some time.
I don't think we've ever seen it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout.
Yeah, and I think, you talk about, what was it, 60%, if you talk about a bit sort of ambiguity and uncertainty, people are looking to somebody to show them the way. Completely. Because they have no idea where to go and what to do, because we've never been in this situation before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what would your advice be in terms of helping people manage the ambiguity and uncertainty? One of the things we talked about a little bit earlier was, my daughter is getting all of her information through social media. Yeah. She's not actually going to sort of like a government website where the facts and everything actually are. So how do you sort of manage that? Because, there's all this fake news on social media and, you were saying this morning you go down to your local coffee shop and everybody's got an opinion about when we're going to reopen and everything. Yep. So amongst this ambiguity and uncertainty, where do you think people should actually go to try to find the truth?
It's a great question, and I'd probably carve up my response in 2 ways that I think people have got to think about. One is, what and who do you want to put trust in? And so I would encourage there that, government sources are the best source of truth in that regard in terms of announcements you can take to the bank. To some degree, there's accountability and a level of follow through that your Twitter feed and the unknown people behind different Twitter handles do not have that same level of public accountability. There will also be, and everyone will have their own sense of who this is, but a handful of really credible news sources where the level of journalism, of fact verification, the access to experts, I'm thinking of organisations like the ABC and the SBS, where there's going to be a good level of reporting and quality of the information. I think the second thing people need to give some thought to is how much time do you want to give over to that? Because with the level of, you can spend all day going down the COVID garden path if you
Absolutely.
want to, and you will be none the wiser for it, and you'll probably feel fairly drained at the end of it all. I find this watching the news every night right now. My partner and I will sit down at the end of the day and we'll watch the news. We come out and we almost have a sigh and we go, whew, what are we going to go do to lift ourselves up again, after watching something like that? So I think the two things to consider are, when you're dealing with ambiguity and uncertainty, do you want to feed it? Because you're not going to get the certainty probably that you're looking for.
Yeah.
You might find points of confidence, sure, and to the degree that's helpful, absolutely seek them. But maybe you check in top and tail of the day. What's the news at the breaking in the morning that I need to think about and factor into my decisions I'm going to make today in how I'm operating, how I'm running my business, what our team are doing, and checking at the end to see how the world's circumstances have changed, but not continually refreshing news.com or my Twitter feed or whatever, because the situation probably won't change that much over the course of that time period. It's very easy to lose a hell of a lot of time to it, and it's very easy to lose your energy to it as well. So don't give over too much mental energy to the uncertainty. Yeah.
Okay, good advice. I'll just do a shout out to everybody too. If you've got any questions now, start to sort of pop them up. I suppose one of the other challenges that we face is, from an employer's perspective, is this whole new landscape from a mental health perspective.
Oh, big time.
Yeah, and so what is that sort of going to look like in terms of shifting the conversation between employers, employees, and even government?
This is a big topic. It's one I'm particularly passionate about, and I don't think, and this is not fair of all businesses, but I think it's probably a fair assessment at large, that this is a topic we have adequately dealt with, talked about, responded to in most organisations, not just in Australia, but internationally. And I think one of the things that this moment in time is shining a very acute light on is the state of mental health. I mean, what we're going through right now, there's not a single person who is isolated or sheltered from the physical, the mental, the financial ramifications of it. Everyone's feeling it to some degree. And therefore, the expectations of how we are demonstrating empathy, how we are supporting people through it, whether they're friends, whether they're colleagues, whether they're our employees, I think the bar's raising. And it is opening up a conversation where I think we're thinking more intensely about the relationship we've got with the people we work with, what our expectations are from our bosses and our people that we're working with. And I think we will notice people making more changes based on how they feel during this moment. That old adage, people forget what you said or how you said it, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. We're at a real time where I think that mental health side of things is coming to the fore. And so I think it's also challenging our systems and processes, because I've had this conversation a lot around board tables in the last few weeks with clients that I've been talking to. We don't have systems set up. We do Are You OK Day at the workplace once a year, or we've got an employee assistance hotline they can call if they need it. In a moment in time like this, that's not sufficient to support people through it. So thinking about, what are the resources that we've got, but what is it on me to do as a leader every day? How am I checking in with my people? So I've seen a lot of companies who are instituting just start of the morning whip arounds, where they all get on a call, they'll see each other's face, everyone checks in. I've got other companies that are talking to me about the regular kind of virtual coffee catch-ups they're doing, just to ask how you're doing, what's going on. Big believer, and we've instituted this in a couple of companies I'm working with, of just simple anonymous pulse surveys if you've got slightly bigger populations you're dealing with. How are people feeling? Get them to populate it with words of how they're experiencing things, not just kind of on a scale. Make sure that in response to that, there's some transparency and you're thinking about what resources do our people need based on what I've seen. But I think that closeness of tracking is absolutely critical. And feel free to reach out and lean on the great resources that are out there. We've got phenomenal mental health organisations in this country, Beyond Blues, Black Dogs, the Inspire Foundations, you name it. Headspace, they've got great digital resources you can direct people to. They've got great online support chat rooms. Make sure your people know how to access that. I think that's really, really important as well. And simple as starting with what are people, like asking people what they need. How can we make this work for you? What are the pressures that you're dealing with? The better that people feel heard and understood, and the degree to which we can make them feel we're accommodating where they're at and meeting them where they are in some way, shape or form, the greater and the healthier our culture will be.
Okay. We're getting heaps of questions, so I'm going to throw to questions in a minute. But just before we do that, a quick thought on the government's idea to start to track everybody using it for data for
Well,
health.
that might come up.
Yes. What are your thoughts on that? And then I'll go to questions.
Yeah, no, fair call. So I think we need a lot more information on how this is going to play out, unsurprisingly. The devil's always in the detail on this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it has come to light in recent times with sort of Cambridge Analytica and a lot of these stories that have, I guess, made it very apparent what the terms and conditions of a lot of these tech platforms that we're using, even with Zoom, the number of data breaches that have happened over the last couple of weeks, the fact that data's been shared with Facebook. Now, most of us were using that platform completely oblivious to the fact that any sort of arrangement was on there. So what the government have said is that they're not going to use it to track us to a degree. Obviously, we're signing up to let it track us, but beyond the scope of the intention of the app, and that it's not going to store or take data stored on our phone. But I think a lot more needs to be explained about how this will work, the length of time it will be operational for, how the data will be protected, all those sorts of things. Because we don't have a great track record in this area necessarily. I'm thinking of all the My Health type of stuff. And I think we want to see a really strong public-private partnership here where we've got, I would love to see this red teamed by a lot of great tech leaders in our country. Get them around a table, hear the proposal, look at the way that this is being suggested to be implemented. We're not the only country talking about this, so what can we be learning best practice internationally? Pull it apart. How can we do it better? What's problematic? And how do we really transparent with people about what they're signing up for? I think that's the most important thing. If we're entering into a social contract with government, believing that we're handing over our information in the name of our own health and the health of our community, that's one thing. If we're entering into a different contract, then we need to go in eyes wide open. So I think there's still a lot more to play out in this space.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to throw to some questions now. So this one is from Sonia. Holly, what are your thoughts on the shape of the next normal? Distance continues, ? Contact-free continues, small government intervention, and maybe changing consumer behaviour. Big questions.
Big questions, Sonia. I love it. No, it's good. Definitely a new normal. I think that's the thing that we're all struggling to get our heads around. I think we're sort of all, I'll often hear comments, and I've been guilty of making them myself too, where it's like, oh, I can't wait till we can again, be it that go and enjoy Melbourne coffee shops like I always do, and just those simple pleasures that you fall accustomed to. Let alone being able to go to a sporting oval and scream my lungs out or anything like that. So I think without question, and it's interesting, we're in a simulation this week where our assignment to brief clients is on thinking about the medium-term ramifications. So my particular scenario is how do you reopen airports in the US to Europe? But thinking about how you reopen schools and these sorts of challenges. Absolutely, there will be some form of physical distancing still required. Hospitality won't be allowed to, have us elbow to elbow anymore. There will be much higher hygiene practices expected of businesses to operate. Because as much as the kind of infection rate is lowering, the infection rate is still present, and the infection rate will remain present, just at a what we've deemed to be a tolerable level to allow the economy to function again. So there will be a raft of new practices implemented, and I think some of what you're seeing right now will remain present for some time. The other thing I think will need to happen is we'll ease gradually back into these conditions. That will be part of how I guess the government helps us adjust to this new state of normal. But I think without a question there'll be physical distancing for a while, certainly heightened hygiene practices. There'll be some industries that will have to fundamentally change the way that they work, the way that they procure their goods and supplies. But I think that the biggest part will be anywhere that we gather publicly. So be that events, that sporting, hospitality industry, and certainly ongoing challenges for our healthcare professionals, that they will be areas that will have fundamentally new norms.
Okay. A question from Sally. What are your thoughts on what has happened to Virgin Australia overnight?
Yeah, I've just been kind of catch up on that news this morning, and it's a really interesting one across the board for airlines. I was reading a piece last week that was talking about the state of the American airline industry. It was talking about the fact that, in any given week, I think and forgive me if I'm slightly misquoting the numbers here, but I think the reference point was Delta Airlines. They normally have about 600,000 people flying with them a week. They're down to 30,000. they're burning 60 million in cash every week.
Yeah, wow.
And what we were chatting offline before about the fact that we think there's every likelihood that potentially international borders don't reopen for 6 months, 12 months.
Yep.
This is an industry that the cost to operate is extraordinary, particularly when there's nobody that's allowed to fly. I mean, I think Virgin were down to 1 flight a day, potentially even lower, between Sydney and Melbourne. So I think what's interesting for us to think about, and to be honest, I haven't read the latest update of this morning. I was reading Richard's letter overnight that was about the broader Virgin business and certainly the demands for government bailout and the calling in the administrators. One of the things I think is critical for us to think about is not just the here and now of getting through this crisis, but also what we want out the other side. I don't think this country wants a single airline operating in the market. We don't want a monopoly or an oligopoly. So how we think about some sort of response to that out the other side will be critical. That being said, there's a lot of businesses that are struggling right now to operate, to keep people employed, you name it. So we do have to be really equitable in the way that we think about government support and bailouts and assistance and what forms those can take. So without delving into the detail and knowing exactly how things have played out this morning, I think it's very sad that a business that has the degree of footprint in terms of the Australians employed is potentially non-operational for a considerable period of time. I think efforts will be made to make sure that they can continue to try and get through, or at least that they could resurge out the other side of this. But you do need to be mindful that there's small businesses all over the country that aren't getting any revenue right now. There are tens of thousands of people, or millions of Australians that are out of work. There's a projection that it will be 10% of our population by June. So we need to be thinking about the whole of Australia, not just the ramifications for one industry.
Yeah, okay. I'm really mindful of time, so I'm going to do 2 more questions.
Sure.
Okay. So one question on leadership. Somebody's asked, who do you think will win the US presidential election? You don't have to answer that, that's fine.
Well, I was going to say, can I say who'll lose it? That'll be Trump's press conferences. Specifically, it is his to lose, not Biden's to win, I actually think.
Okay, well, good answer. And then a question from Kian. Holly, there have been so many negatives associated with the COVID situation for business. What positives do you think we should take away from this experience and change the way we do business in the future?
Kian, it's a great question. And it's something I actually felt sort of inspired to write a blog about 2 weeks ago on LinkedIn, just sort of saying, I think in these moments too, we need to cling to hope. You know, we need to find these points of light and great stories of businesses adapting, you know, be it, you know, manufacturing companies that have gone from making clothes to making healthcare workers clothing, or gin companies that are now making hand sanitizer, and these wonderful stories of businesses. I mean, you see it all the time too, just the generosity of spirit, you know, pizza businesses that are small family enterprises that are offering free food at night for certain hours for healthcare workers, and just wonderful things of people doing what they can to support people where they are, I think is great. And I think, to key into your question around how do we kind of find some positivity out of this, I think that's on how we use this moment, what we're going through, and the learnings to build stronger businesses, build stronger cultures, and build a better community. There are things that are illuminating right now that are unfortunately, that just flat out unfortunate. You know, an example would be something like the spike that we've seen in domestic violence while people have been at home during this period of time.
Yeah.
We need to make sure, we need to honour everyone who has found themselves in a circumstance that they should not be in. You know, that is a great, just a great blight on our culture that we have that problem to the degree that it does. And we need to make sure that that conversation gets the oxygen that it needs out the other side of this crisis to build a sustainable solution to it and to support a far richer culture that can help more women and children out of those circumstances. So I think for me, part of it's on the inspiration we can draw right now from the ingenuity, the hope, the generosity, the selflessness that we see demonstrated every day if we go looking for it, if we find the right news sources to turn our attention to. I encourage you to tap into those feeds to look for the good news. I have an app that I use, it's actually an Australian local called Inkle, that has a good news tab that I make sure I flick through every day to read points of light and stories. There's certainly a lot of that trending online on different social feeds too, but turning your attention to that. And I think the other thing for me that's been really amazing to watch is just people supporting the people in their lives. The efforts that people have gone to make meals, to reach out, to be, I think we often talk about, it's just the little things. The little things are the really, really big things right now. And it links back to something we were talking about earlier, but people might forget what you said or how you said it, but they will not forget how you made them feel in these moments. So for me, that's the inspiration and the light we can draw in the here and now. I think the inspiration and light I hope we can draw beyond is that we can turn back in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and we can go that this wasn't a moment that broke our country, this was a moment that made our country, because we came together out of it. We built stronger systems and processes. We identified some things that weren't working before COVID, but COVID made it really apparent they weren't working, and we leaned in and we fixed them properly. And so I think a lot of the inspiration that I hope will be drawn out of the responses of leaders like the people watching this today, who are going to go, I'm going to make sure this changes off the back of COVID. And that's a challenge I think each and every one of us, to the degree that we can, in our sphere of influence, in our world, whether it's our family, our community, our team, our company, can play a role in.
Okay, final question. What's one thing you won't take for granted again?
Oh, that's a great question. Do you know what? Overwhelmingly, hugs. Like, I'm such a hugger. I'm a giant koala bear, and I have to physically restrain I miss being able to shake people's hands when I greet them. I miss being able to embrace people. That for me is something I don't know that I ever fully appreciated to the extent that I do now, that it's not allowed to happen. Yeah. But I really miss that. And I also, as someone who's fallen in love with Melbourne, I moved here 6 years ago. One of the great things about this city is the hustle and bustle of its cafe culture and its restaurants and its small bars. And I look forward to seeing that industry thriving again. Third thing, I can't wait for sport to be back up and running. I love it that my team, the mighty Port Adelaide, are sitting on top of the AFL ladder after one round. So, hey, if we award a premiership now, that's okay by me. But it feels weird to be in April and to not be spending weekends at football ovals in particular for me, cheering, to be seeing kids of all ages running around, kicking footballs, in soccer balls, on the netball courts every weekend. So I look forward to that noise and chatter and energy of our community be back up and running again.
Awesome. And I'll just go Saners.
I had to get it in.
Holly Ransom, thanks so much for joining us today. We probably could have talked for an hour today. Could've. Incredibly insightful.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And thanks for taking the time out and joining us.
Pleasure. I look forward to being able to be back with everyone in person before too long.
Absolutely. Yeah. I look forward to that hug.
Too right.
And don't forget that on Thursday, we're welcoming Bernard Salt to the Fireside Chat. Bernard heads the demographic company which provides special advice on demographics, consumer and social trends for business. And we'll be discussing work practices and consumer behaviour created by the coronavirus. One not to be missed. See you Thursday. Thanks, everyone.